Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narativ Live. It's so nice to have you with us today. Look who's here. Jill Wine-Banks is here. And so is LB from LA. Hi, Jill. How are you?
Hi, it's good to see both of you.
It's great to have you on. You know, for us, for people who follow this stuff as religiously as LB and I do, you're like Madonna. So it's that exciting.
True.
It's that exciting to have you on.
I want to be Bette Midler, though.
Oh, you can be Bette Midler as well. You could be both of them together in a duet on Grammy night. That's how excited we are to have you on tonight. And it's going to be a really interesting hour. There's a lot happening in the news, as many people know, and there's also lots to talk about in terms of your life and your incredible book, The Watergate Girl, that just came out. And that's also your pen today. So we're lucky to have that on the show as well. LB, you and Jill have such a lot in common, I've discovered as I was thinking about today's show. You're both sort of trailblazers, and that you're both have exposed organized crime links to a president.
I can't compare to Jill's experience, of being this, the incredible voice for justice within the Justice Department, battling these criminals for as long as she has. But it is interesting, Jill. I think I was just saying to Zev, I think it's so fascinating that, not to always put a gender divide in there, but I'd love to hear that opening to your book. I don't know if Zev's going to play that.
Yeah, we're going to play that next.
You can't get away from it a little, in your story. And there's something about having a woman's brain looking at organized crime, looking at these criminals, looking at these mobsters. It doesn't hit us the same way as it seems to hit our male counterparts, in that there's no glamour in there for us. We're like, the criminals. Okay.
I think that it has been a long time coming to get to equality, and we aren't there yet. I'm still hoping that we will achieve it as we sit here right now waiting for the announcement of the vice presidential candidate, which, of course, we will interrupt this discussion if it happens.
My one eye's on that.
Exactly. We know it's going to be a woman, and that's very exciting, although this will be the second time a woman has been nominated to be vice president. The first was under Vice President Mondale, nominated Geraldine Ferraro. But yes, there is some difference. First of all, let me say, in writing the book is probably the first time that I came to realize how much sexism had defined my life. As I started writing the book and deciding what stories go into this and what stories don't go into it, I realized that a lot of the stories that I wanted to share involved how I had been treated differently because I was a woman. And believe me, for every story that's in the book, there are a dozen that aren't in the book, because it happened every day, every time. And I find that it's still going on now, which is despicable. Again, going to the vice presidential nomination, the way that the women being considered are judged and talked about is not words that would be applied to any male candidate. The ambition quality, that's something that would be applauded if Joe Biden were looking at a male vice president, as opposed to she's too ambitious as a criticism. And I first saw that when I joined Jenner and Block in Chicago right after Watergate. I moved back to Chicago to marry my high school boyfriend, joined Jenner and Block. And although I was brand new and didn't know the associates, one of the only other female partners asked me to come to the evaluation session and to listen with an ear to whether or not there were different words used about male judgment and female judgment, or judging of male and female associates. And my God, it was true. Men were applauded for being aggressive, whereas women were downgraded for being, dare I say the word, what's an alternative, they were not complimented for being aggressive.
Yeah.
They were criticized. And I really heard it loud and clear. And I know that that same judgment was applied to me. And it was something that I always kept in mind in a courtroom. The jury has to trust you, but they also have to like you.
Mm-hmm.
And so even things like a little thing like Ms. became an option when I was first practicing law. And I had to decide whether I would use the term Ms. or Mrs. And I worried that if I said Ms., I would offend too many people on a jury. It was too early in the stage.
Too early for that. Interesting.
And so I used Mrs. not because I felt that that was appropriate, but because my goal was to have the jury trust me and like me and trust me enough that they would accept my arguments. And that's, if you want to win, you have to keep those kinds of things in mind.
Right. Baby steps. So you, as a federal prosecutor, there were not many women federal prosecutors when you were doing Watergate. I mean, you were among the first.
Not in organized crime.
Certainly not doing organized crime.
And I was the first in organized crime, the first woman prosecutor in organized crime, and I was the only trial lawyer in the Watergate trial.
And that big moment that came in the trial where you are interviewing, I guess, whatever the word would be legally, Nixon's secretary about those missing 18 minutes of tapes. And it's a fantastic moment, but again, it's sort of based around gender. Here you are, a woman, and she's a secretary who's the president's secretary. It's a sort of a very sort of typical role for that at that time for a woman. It's not today, but it was then. And so there was a bit of that. It was two women facing off against each other, at least from a media perspective, but also from a national gender perspective. I'm going to play you the beginning bits of your book, so you'll take us through it yourself, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
The previous day, Rose had testified that she was in the middle of transcribing the tape from June 20th, 1972, when the phone rang at the far end of her desk, and she answered the call while keeping her foot on the pedal. That, she said, must have erased the president's recorded conversation, replacing it with a steady hum. I asked her to demonstrate. She pushed the start button on her machine and placed her sturdy black pump on the pedal. The crowd fell silent as the blank demonstration tape began to whir. "What did you do after the phone rang?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice level. Rose glared at me. At 55, she was nearly twice my age, petite but fierce, dressed that day in a color-blocked turquoise chartreuse and orange sheath, topped with a strand of pearls. A gold cross glinted from a ring on her right hand. "I had to take those off first," she said in a hostile tone, delicately pointing to the headphones resting on the ledge. With that slight movement of her fingers, her foot lifted from the pedal. The tape stopped cold. Even if she'd mistakenly pushed record instead of stop, releasing the foot pedal when she answered the phone would have halted the tape, and there would be no 18.5-minute gap. Rose had lied, and I had caught her.
It was a moment. She had lied to you, right? She talked about this pedal. I don't think there's ever been that much time spent in a courtroom about a typing machine or dictation machine, but she had lied to you about those 18 minutes of tapes. Tell us a little bit about what that lie was.
Well, the first thing you have to know is that there's nothing as effective as a photograph or a demonstration. It's very rare in a federal court to get a demonstration, but I was allowed to do it, and of course it failed. Just so that your viewers will, there's a
picture of it. Yeah.
There it is.
That's right after she failed in the courtroom. She said, but it's different in my office. I did it in my office. I did it in my office. And I said to the judge, well, then, Your Honor, maybe we should adjourn to her office. And for some reason, the White House didn't object, and the judge said, okay. And so I hopped in a cab to go to the office right next to the Oval Office, my first time ever in the White House. And I was in the inner sanctum. So it was very exciting. And she was able to physically do what you see there. But you also notice she's holding on. What you don't see is that she had white knuckles holding onto her chair in order to make that reach. there's no way that she could have actually, she said she kept her left foot on the pedal. And for viewers at home, try this yourself, because if you're reaching with your left hand, you have a much shorter, I'm trying to reach.
Yeah, that
but
would be hard to reach back here, I think.
If you had your right foot on the pedal, you could push and you have a much greater extent. But she had already testified before she did the demonstration. I had her verbally describe it. She had said she had her left foot on the pedal. So in the courtroom, when she was doing it, she had on headphones because that was what she needed in order to transcribe. And when I asked her the first question, she couldn't hear me. So she lifted the headphone and said, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And so we agreed that she would take off the headphones for the purpose of my questioning. She put them down. And when I began the questioning again, she very delicately pointed, well, before I did anything, I had to take those off. And the slight movement of her hand, her foot came off the pedal. And you could see the reel-to-reel tape immediately stopped.
Oh, wow.
And the jury box was filled with the press. They immediately ran out of the courtroom to call the story in, because this is in the days before cell phones. They had to go to a bank of payphones, which many people in this audience will never have seen before, but there used to be payphones, and you went into this bank of payphones to call in the story. So it was during that time that we agreed we'd go to the White House. It was very exciting. And the issue was, I don't actually, in retrospect, I feel sorry for her, because the White House threw her under the bus. They said, we've now discovered an 18-and-a-half-minute gap. There is no innocent explanation for it, and only Rosemary Woods can talk about it. Now, what I've learned since is, number one, Rosemary Woods was called a secretary at the time. She was actually a very close advisor to the president.
Yeah, today should be the senior advisor.
She would probably be chief of staff in today's world. She was definitely a gatekeeper. She came into direct conflict with H.R. Haldeman, Bob Haldeman, who was the chief of staff, and who at one point moved her out of the West Wing into a separate, completely different area, because he really wanted to undermine her power. She was known as Aunt Rose to the Nixon daughters. She exchanged clothes with Pat Nixon, his wife. Her brother, Joe Woods, who was the sheriff of Cook County, my hometown, Cook County, exchanged suits with Richard Nixon. So, I mean, they were very, very, very close. And she actually gave advice. And in fact, just to prove the point, when he was approached by the Republicans and told that he would be convicted if he didn't resign, he was afraid to tell his wife and daughters, and he tasked Rosemary Woods with that job. She is the one who told them that they were leaving the White House and returning to California.
On the topic of the tapes, though, at one point in the story or in the book, you talk about her being sort of his capo, he's number two, that she was involved in sort of covering this crime instinctually as part of his sort of mobster-like relationship with her. So you feel sorry for her on the one hand, because they threw her to the dogs, as it were, but on the other hand, she was also part of his crew.
Yes, I'm not saying that she wouldn't have done it if she had been asked. What we now know about the erasure, and let me just give a quick background, which is when we subpoenaed the tapes, the president stonewalled. Does that sound familiar, by the way? I don't mention Donald Trump in the book until the epilogue, but you will see obvious parallels that just stick out no matter what you do. So we subpoenaed 9 tapes, and they said, no, you can't have them. Finally, they said, after firing Cox and after a public outcry that left them no alternative, they said, okay, we'll give you the tapes. That was October 20th. He fired Cox. October 23rd, he said, I'll give you the tapes. October 31st, he said, well, I cannot give you 9 because 2 are missing. They weren't recorded. Judge Sirica was suspicious. He ordered a hearing. In that hearing, I felt that Rick Mendonista, who was my partner, was taking too many witnesses. As a result, I said to him at a break, I'm taking the next witness, whoever that is, and then we're going to share equally. And he agreed with me. And the next witness called was Rosemary Woods.
Huh.
Not when she was a suspect. It was just when she had handled the tapes, and we were trying to find out about these 2 missing tapes, not the one that she erased. And luckily, I asked a question that proved devastating later on. I had asked her what precautions she took to not erase tapes. And she said, well, I used my head. It's the only thing I had. She was extremely hostile.
Mm.
And later on, when we found out that she had actually erased a tape, it was clear that she had been withholding evidence, because she could have said to me, well, actually, I wasn't careful enough, but she didn't. So then when they, on the day before Thanksgiving, announced that there was a 3rd tape with a problem, and they said this thing about the 18.5 minutes and Rosemary Woods being responsible, I, of course, said, well, I questioned her the first time. She's my witness. I'm doing it again this time. So now she was a key witness. She was a suspect. I had to give her the Miranda warnings, which is something lawyers very, very, very seldom do, because it's done by the FBI before we ever get to them.
Right.
So I had to give her Miranda warnings, which was very dramatic for me to do that.
Yes.
And then I believe, in retrospect, that she actually thinks she might have done what she said, even though it proved that she didn't do it by her demonstration, but also our technical review showed that there were 5 to 9 separate erasures. It wasn't like she pushed one button, held her foot on the thing.
It wasn't a whoopsie doodle.
So we now know that she definitely did not do what she said, that it wasn't necessarily that she lied. And one of the reasons we did not indict her for perjury is that to this day, we cannot prove who erased it. If you ask me, it probably was the president. He had access and motive. I think he was technically not very good. He listened and went, oh, that's terrible, I'll erase that. Then he listened some more and went, oh, I'll erase that. By the time he finished erasing in 8, let's say 7 to 9 times that conversation, he went, well, let's listen to the second conversation. And he went, well, I can't erase all of them. They're all terrible. I'm just going to continue stonewalling. I won't give them any tapes. And that's what led to the continued stonewalling.
That's really interesting. So he just sort of gave up. He didn't realize how horrible he was. He had sort of hung himself with his mouth, right? That he just
exactly. Was, he had the system installed, and you get used to anything. So it's not like right now I know I'm being recorded. I have to watch my words. I can't say bad things. But in general, you're not aware of the words you say, and you're not thinking someone else is going to listen to them. So I think he really was unaware of the taping. And when he listened, he went, oh my gosh, think of the things I said. And remember, eventually, in preparation for trial, we asked for 64 additional tapes, one of which is known as the smoking gun tape, in which you can hear the president and Haldeman discussing, let's use the CIA to say that there is a national security so that the FBI doesn't follow the money. And they were definitely obstructing justice by asking the FBI to get involved, or to stop being involved, by using a phony thing from the CIA. And you can hear it plain and clear. And that's actually the tape that led to the Republicans going to the White House and saying, Mr. Nixon, you have to resign, because otherwise you will be, the 3 articles of impeachment had been voted. You will be convicted on all 3 of those. And he announced his resignation the next day. And it's interesting because his actual departure was August 9th, and we're only a day past that now. So this is the 46th anniversary of Richard Nixon's acceptance of his guilt and his belief in the rule of law, so that he actually resigned. We're not seeing that happen with this administration.
August, 46 years ago, that's when he resigned.
Yes, exactly.
That particular organization, the Committee to Re-elect the President,
right,
has so many people in there that are in with this administration, some going to jail. So I'd love to just talk about that sort of crew. And I'd love to also talk about, you had a witness that you really worked, and you had to really work this guy's ego, and that whole gender thing we're talking about, of like, it's not just, I got to get the jury to like me, but if you're in organized crime and you're dealing with witnesses and you're trying to get them to cooperate with you so you could take down the head guy, right? The head of the mob family was Nixon. So we got to go for the boss. And so we got to roll these guys up to get to them. And those men required so much pampering just to get the thing out of them that was in their own best interest. But you know, you just have to, it's like this delicate egos on these men is just something to behold. So I'd love to talk about that as well. So Creep and Roger Stone and who all those characters were and how they resurfaced with Donald Trump. And let's not forget that Richard Nixon, you know, toured Trump Tower. They've been, when it was under construction, those two men were locked at the hip. They had the same crew around them. I think he even fell on that construction site, like hurt himself or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think there's like a story on that. I don't know. I'll have to check that. But let's talk about that. And then let's talk about that witness and how you worked him, as I'm really fascinated with how you work these organized crime witnesses.
Okay, so first of all, we're talking about Jeb Magruder, who rose to a very prominent position in the White House and then moved over to the committee to re-elect the president. And remember that it was the committee to re-elect the president that was one of the very first clues to the involvement of the White House and the committee in the break-in on June of '72. Because
was it
you
two
had
break-ins or just
there were two break-ins, but they got caught the second time. They went in and they realized that the bug they had put on the phone of the chairman of the DNC wasn't working. So they broke in a second time to try to fix that and to take photographs, because they were carrying very expensive cameras. They were wearing rubber gloves. They were wearing very fancy suits. And they had $100 bills, fresh $100 bills in their pockets, which is the money you referred to, the money that could have been traced to cashing a campaign check in one of their accounts in Florida. There were 5 Cuban Americans who were part of this group. McCord, who was the chief of security, used an alias after he was arrested. They got caught red-handed in the committee's offices, and he used an alias. But as soon as it was discovered that it was McCord and that he was, you know, I mean, obviously, if you're reading the newspaper and you go, whoa, this is strange. You have a bunch of former CIA agents who were part of the Bay of Pigs invasion. And then you have the head of security for Creep. Well, I think maybe Creep is involved in this. Whoa.
You would think so.
Maybe there's a crime syndicate going on. Yeah.
Seems
really
pretty obvious to me. So Creep had a clear role from the very, very beginning. And it was actually McCord who, under pressure the night before sentencing by Judge Sirica, wrote a letter to Judge Sirica saying, Your Honor, you were right throughout this case. You kept asking questions about who else was involved. You're right, higher ups were involved. Hush money was paid to keep us quiet. That was, to me, the real break in the case. That happened in March, right at the burglary was June of '72. The verdict came in January of '73. In March for sentencing, this is when the letter came in. We were appointed in May. So we had the benefit of that letter and having confirmed what was obvious to me. You know, as a prosecutor, when I first was reading the White House saying, oh, this is a third-rate burglary and we have nothing to do with it, I'm going, yeah. And by that point, Gordon Liddy had been caught. So when you want to talk about interesting characters, Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt were two of the other people tried in the burglary. Hunt worked for the White House. Right. Liddy worked for Creep. They are two of the most colorful characters in American history. I add Tony Ulasewicz to that, who was one of the ones monitoring the break-in from across the street of the Watergate Hotel complex where the DNC office was. He was in the Howard Johnson, but he stopped listening. But he
Yes.
stopped. He started watching television, so he
Yes.
missed when the police pulled up. He didn't
light
call them
Oh
to
my
say, "Get
gosh,
out,
really?
get out, get out." Except, yes,
Oh, it's the greatest scene ever. It's like a bungling idiots with their suits and the mobsters behind them with the cash in the pockets and
Exactly.
we're in the wrong office.
Oh, it's
I mean,
fantastic.
it's fantastic. Yeah.
So you got to say, I mean, it really was quite a scene. But back to Jeb Magruder. Jeb was, I think, one
That
of
guy.
the most amoral people I've ever met. He just had no sense of right and wrong. Um, he he just never quite got it. And getting him to tell the facts and the truth was all I just wanted the facts. I remember Joe Friday from Dragnet, nothing but the facts, ma'am. And that was me. I just wanted the information. I did not care about anything other than the facts.
And he was
and
like doing a book
eventually,
deal behind the scenes, right? He was like,
yeah,
it's like
yeah, he did.
orchestrating him. I mean, he's
And
like
he made a
record
lot
dealer.
of money. He made a lot of money on that book. It
Yeah.
was one of the
I've
first
seen
books
the
out.
light. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, not so much. I mean, I did get to review a copy to make sure he wasn't saying anything differently in the book than he said to us, and that everything matched with other information that we knew. But he was tough, and I was very kind to him. And I actually, in terms of, you mentioned about women see things differently, I would when he was preparing for trial, when I brought him, he was already in jail, although it was in a, very nice federal sort of country club type place. And he was brought into DC. And so I would let him have lunch with his wife. I would leave my office and let them have a picnic lunch that she would bring. And I thought for sure their marriage would last, and it didn't. And then he also, by the way, he became a pastor, which, I mean, that to me is so far-fetched. I would have never, ever predicted that. But he is who he is. He completely fell apart spending one night in the DC jail. And he came to my office the next day after first being brought there, sat down and started sobbing uncontrollably. He had his head on the desk. I couldn't get him to say what was wrong. I, of course, assumed the very worst. He was in jail. He had been attacked. And I also believed, and again, this is one of those things going back to what I was saying earlier, depending on your goal, the reason that I used Mrs. instead of Ms., the reason I approach a lot of things is I needed to know what was wrong, and I didn't think he would ever admit to me if he had been raped in jail. And I went to get Tony, who was our IRS agent, and was probably the oldest person on the team. And I felt like if he's going to tell anyone, he would tell Tony. And Tony went in, and I waited pacing outside my office while he came out. He said, no, he just couldn't sleep because the lights were on all night and the TV was going, and he was just, so we had him moved. Yeah, he was right. And
he's a fancy.
So, but
No,
I didn't keep him there after that. I had him moved to a federal facility.
He didn't have a lot of remorse. That seems to be one of the big things you describe about him. And that seems to be a common thread among some of these characters we're encountering, both in the Donald Trump world and in the Nixon world. There's sort of this, they do the crime sort of willingly, and they don't really care what might happen.
Well, they're from
to anybody
another
else.
realm. Yeah, they're from another realm. So they're from a realm where they don't understand that there's another way that things can be done, that there is sort of right and wrong. Like for them, it's like, well, yeah, of course I burned the stuff and the evidence, and I was a problem because I got caught and I shouldn't have done. Everything's about the mechanics of how they make their way through their world successfully. And we come in with this perspective of, no, actually, there should be something inside of you that's telling you to stop this because it's going to be damaging to somebody, or it's a crime, or it's going to hurt somebody. And that's never their concern. And they don't understand that there actually are human beings where that actually is a concern. And where they do encounter it, then those people are sort of dupes, or, oh, well, this is a good person that doesn't understand. They just don't understand the way the world really works.
Yes.
I understand the way we were. And if you knew what I knew, you would do things exactly the same way. That's their process
Right.
because of the world that they're born into.
You and I have talked about organized crime and how smart most of the people at the top levels are, and that if they would use their intellect for legitimate business purposes, they would probably be very successful in that business. In the case of some of the people that you're mentioning, and in terms of commonalities, you mentioned Roger Stone, but you didn't mention Roy Cohn, who was a mentor.
We can talk about Roy.
Yeah.
We can.
So, but
Yeah,
these
we
are
can talk
people
about Roy.
who totally, there's a difference between being immoral and being amoral. And I think Jeb was amoral. He never even thought about it. It never occurred to him that was something. His own motion forward in his career was important to him. And that's how he judged what to do, was, will this serve my purposes? And of course, let's not forget that the top sets the tone. And when you have someone like Richard Nixon who says, well, if the president does it, it's not illegal. I have total ability to do anything I want and it's not illegal. Or you have Donald Trump basically saying the same thing, then the people below him act in accordance with that. And that's one of the problems I think that we face in both administrations. So people carry out the actions that are set. When you have a dirty tricks team, when you have a plumbers unit, as the White House did in the Nixon era, that's what happens. Roger Stone is back again, and he's advising the president again, who just commuted his sentence. Otherwise, he'd be in jail, not advising the president. So not only is he not in jail, which he should be, because the crimes he committed and was convicted of by a jury of his peers are serious, serious crimes.
Serious crimes. Witness tampering.
Yes. And threatening a witness, threatening, and I'm a pet lover. So when you threaten someone's pet, I take it seriously.
You were talking about listening to the Michael Flynn arguments before we got on the air here. And, there is an attempt, it seems, at least from the Justice Department, or at the very top of the Justice Department, from the Attorney General himself, to really cover up every single crime that Trump could be impacted by, whether it's Roger Stone or Michael Flynn. And there is obviously a commonality there between Nixon and Trump in terms of wanting to cover up and obstructing justice. But this seems so much more serious these days. I mean, this is a much more, it's a whole different level.
Well, Mitchell, who was the Attorney General under Nixon and then took over as the head of CREEP, went to jail for his crimes, for his obstruction of justice. If there is any justice, William Barr will also go to jail. But William Barr is a much more serious threat to democracy because he's still the Attorney General while he's doing all these things. And I do think that the motion to dismiss the Flynn case is an attempt to keep Flynn from cooperating with the prosecutors by saying, look, you're not going to go to jail. You're going to get out of this. You don't have to cooperate. Otherwise, he might be telling us what he knows about Donald Trump's knowledge of Russian interference in the election and many other things. So to me, it's a clear case of an apparent obstruction of justice. But it goes way beyond that. It goes way beyond that. All of the, including the attack at Lafayette Square on peaceful protesters, including just so many things that Barr has done that make him impeachable, disbarable. I mean, he should be disbarred for sure. And he won't be impeached because hopefully he'll be out of office before that could happen. I mean, I put a lot of faith in the American people and in seeing what's going on and in making sure that people get out the vote in November so that we can be freed of what I see as a very serious threat to democracy. So many of the things that are going on. And partly it is, McGahn being told not to testify. It's partly having people from Homeland Security told, you can't testify about children being locked up in cages. They are stonewalling not just in a criminal case, not just in the impeachment investigation. They're stonewalling on ordinary,
Across the
routine
board. Right.
oversight by Congress. And if Congress
Right.
can't oversee the executive, we've lost a very serious part of our democracy and a serious part of our Constitution.
Absolutely. So what are the
That's
chances
right.
that Bill Barr is ever going to get charged in reality? Because as we saw with Nixon, you know, when the day arrived, he got off.
Well,
he got
that was
pardoned,
unusual.
and we can't stand for that. Because here's the connective tissue underneath these two. Another big connective tissue. If Richard Nixon had been pursued through the Department of Justice, right? If he had been fully investigated, if that money had been fully investigated beyond what Jill accomplished with the team she was with, right? Beyond that whole accomplishment, he was facing a criminal trials that would have led to having to answer even more about that money and about that crime syndicate sitting behind him. Richard Nixon was Mickey Cohen's guy. He was his politician before he became vice president, before he became president, right? So he was a congressman owned completely by the outfit. And there's no wishy-washy around this history I'm giving you right now. The gangsters themselves said it. Yeah, that was our guy.
There's the article.
And there's an article. I think that's from the Stanford Daily.
Correct, yeah.
So Cohen was he was calling journalists from prison, going, and this guy was a psychopath, and he was saying, you cannot let this Nixon guy become president. Like, don't let our guys get in there. There's too much at stake, and also because it's dangerous. You're going to expose a lot of racketeering behind certain characters. And so this is the other thing. It's not just that Mike Flynn was aware of the Russian interference. What else was Mike Flynn into? What about some of these other deals that these people have been orchestrating and trying to pull off, using the presidency and the campaign first and then the presidency as a front for a criminal organization, right? For a crime spree. Mm-hmm. That's the threat to any of these people, any of these little things getting poked at or pulled apart. The threat is what's going to get exposed behind it, as it is with any crime family. And so when you look at these men as part of a crime family, you can understand their behavior and their actions a little bit better than just writing it off of, oh, he's dumb, or oh, he doesn't know any better, oh, he's sexist or racist or whatever the ist is. You can, okay, all that stuff, but also there's some real crimes here that they're trying to pull off and don't want to be stopped. And so that's what a prosecution will uncover, right? And that's what got stopped with that pardon.
So let me put it a little differently. There was an issue about indicting the president before, as soon as we heard the smoking gun tape. We had already indicted by that time. And we had this battle with Leon Jaworski about indicting the president. And he said, no, there is a legitimate investigation going on by Congress. There is an impeachment going on. That's the appropriate way to deal with a president who does crimes. I did not at the time agree with that. I felt that he should be standing trial with his co-defendants, that he was the leader of this. He had set the tone for it. Now, there's no reason, we have no evidence that he knew about the break-in before the break-in, but we know that he knew within minutes of the arrest and that he became part of the cover-up immediately. And he said, I can get $1 million to keep them quiet. I mean, he was into this full hog. He, tell the CIA to stop the FBI from investigating the money. He knew that the trail to him was very clear, that the $100 bill serial numbers could be linked to the check to his campaign, and that would prove, that they had funded the break-in. So all we need to look at is the crimes that were committed in the White House and in the committee to reelect.
Right.
Those crimes were serious enough to be indicted for just those crimes, skipping any other things that might have been going on. And part of this
Right.
was the attitude of the ends justify the means. That's why they felt they should go ahead with this cover-up, because he was such a great, in their mind, he was such a great president. And I will say, he did open China. He passed Title IX, which helped women. He invented the EPA, which now Donald Trump would like to undo. So, right, exactly.
But he obtained that office through criminal acts, whether he was aware of it or not. His people, you know, he maintained it. I don't know if you take that, you know, there's something about criminal activity, real criminal activity, indictable crimes, as you said, around getting the job or keeping the job, that I think argue against whether you can be indicted while you have the job. Well, you wouldn't, especially with this president now. You wouldn't have the job, maybe. We don't know. We can't tell. But there was crimes getting you in there, right? And then there's crimes since you've been in there. So
okay, so I certainly know about Trump's crimes getting into office. I'm not so familiar with anything, so you're going to have to inform me about any crimes that Nixon created. He was reelected despite being clearly guilty.
Right.
Right. The obstruction after definitely played into it.
Was involved. Right. Criminal activity involved in the reelection with his
right.
committee.
Okay. All right. Yes, definitely that. Definitely that. And definitely if he had been discovered as having been behind the break-in before the election, it could have changed the outcome of the election. He was elected 49 out of 50 states. Wow. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so that should be a warning to everyone that here's someone who was clearly guilty of crimes, to anybody who was really carefully following it, but who got reelected by a landslide. Wow. So nobody should take for granted that the polls mean anything, even though they're now showing Biden being ahead in every single poll.
Doesn't matter.
And,
you gotta vote.
And even though there's, the thing that bothers me the most, if I could just divert for a second, in terms of the impeachment trial, was in the end, when Justice Roberts said, "How do you vote?" It wasn't voting that he was not impeachable. You had to say not guilty. And for many senators, that was a lie. They knew he was guilty of the crimes he was charged with. They just didn't think it was impeachable because they liked him. They wanted him to stay in office. They think he's doing something for the Supreme Court. And watching Merrick Garland today in the Flynn hearing made me go like, oh, I wish he were on the Supreme Court, which he should have been because he was the one who should have been. So I'm just saying it's a really sad state of affairs right now, and slightly different than what happened in the Nixon era.
It is. The enabling, the full-scale enabling is out of control. And I want to kind of bring this back to Rosemary, right?
Yes.
In that, you said something, I think it might have even been a year or two ago. I don't remember, Jill, because I feel like we've been in this thing with this guy in the office for like a century. But there was a moment where Ivanka's role in some stuff was coming under some scrutiny. And I think it was even Giuliani or someone said, it like, oh no, you can't go up after a woman like that. You're going to, talking about Mueller, you're going to go. And you had the same reaction I did, which was, and I was like, oh, I love Jill, because you were the only person that called that out and said, hang on, it doesn't matter that she's a woman. She's in this.
Well, if you put someone in a position of power, if you put someone in a decisive role in the White House, they are that role, and they have to be held to certain standards. And Rose was, I will say, of course, this was a long time ago, and the role of women was quite different back then. But the reason she wasn't indicted for perjury was really not because she was a woman, although I have to say that probably played into it, that we thought she'd be a sympathetic figure. But it was because in order to prove someone lied, you need to prove what the truth is. And it's not enough to show that it's quite improbable that she did this stretch, which made her a laughing stock. I mean, every newspaper had that picture on the front page, every magazine.
Right? The Rosemary stretch.
Exactly. I have some great cartoons from her block, did several great cartoons. So yeah, it was really, really terrible. And by the way, notice that dress that you're seeing on screen right now. It was, when I started writing this book, I was just writing from memory. And then I thought, well, I better check things. And I looked up photographs, I did research, and I had described her dress exactly correctly, the chartreuse and turquoise. But if you look really closely, there's an orange diamond shape in the center. So her dress actually was orange, chartreuse, and turquoise. And I also had forgotten that she was wearing pearls, which in the picture I saw. And the other thing is, in other photographs, you can see it, not in this one, she's actually wearing,
if you could get that's the one.
Yeah. But if you could, the bottom picture, if you could do a close up of that, she's wearing a pin.
Oh, she
and
is?
She is. Of course, I didn't realize that then, and pins weren't, I mean, I wore pins back then. And if you look at the pictures in my book, you will see in my high school yearbook picture, I'm wearing the pin. And in most of the pictures of me going in and out of court, when I'm not wearing a coat that covers it, you can see I'm wearing pins. Now, they weren't message pins as they are now. They were just decorative things that I've always liked pins. But I was amazed that she wore them.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your fashion icon status, because it's not just pins. You know, there was the miniskirt too. I mean, originally you were sort of, declared as the federal prosecutor who wore miniskirts, but you did that sort of awaringly. I mean, you must have been conscious of the fact that you were making a fashion statement at the time, and it was a good fashion statement. And you've progressed to pins now, but throughout your life, you haven't been shy of that. Tell us a little bit more. I am
wearing a pin. Well, first of all, I am wearing a pin in that picture. If you look closely, on the ascot there is a pin which I still own. It was one of the first pins I ever owned.
I love that whole look.
But it really it was not. I was not making a fashion statement. I wasn't. If you went shopping as a woman in 1970s, that's what was available. I would have had to have custom-made clothes in order to wear a longer skirt, because that's the length of skirts. Right. It just simply is what it was. And so it was not anything outrageous. It was just that's what was available. And there is a funny story about skirts, which is women were not allowed to wear pants in court, period. Absolutely forbidden. So my first trial was in Alaska against a labor racketeer. And
right? Teamster, right? Were you?
Head of the Teamsters, very powerful. And I get there and it's 30 below zero. 30 below zero. The jurors are all wearing flannel-lined pants and mucklucks, and I had to walk to court in a skirt.
Oh no.
So it was, it was really terrible, but there was no option because I could not, I couldn't be heard.
You were the miniskirt federal prosecutor because that's what you had to wear into court. That was part of the rules of
court.
Well,
I had to wear a skirt, and the only skirts that you could buy then they were called miniskirts by today's standards. Like. You can see, but it wasn't a mini. I mean, minis are, at least another 6 or 9 inches higher. Yeah. It was above my knee, but it's just a skirt. It's not. It's hardly provocative or revealing. I will say that
you did the tall boot, so that's like helping to. Try to get it into a suit there. Yeah, it's a great look.
It is. It was a suit. That suit, by the way, got auctioned off for charity. It was a brown velvet suit. I still remember it. And it was auctioned for charity. So I'm very happy about that. And I've had some of my pins have now been auctioned for charity, mostly for democratic causes, I would say.
So instead of Nixon, that he was elected by mobsters or with the help of mobsters, and one of them, well, some of them were Jewish mobsters, in that they were part of the Russian mob out of Brooklyn and other places. And, LB can help me fill in some of the gaps here on Lansky. But, Lansky was asked about this in a television interview well after the fact. And I've got a little clip here about this. And this is also, just afterwards, we can talk a little bit more about, it's the same mob that seems to be supporting Trump. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about whether there's a connection there. But let's listen to Lansky. Do you want to tell us who Lansky is again quickly, LB, before we run this?
Sure. Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano created what is now known as organized crime. They organized crime in the United States. They're bootleggers. They were originally bootleggers. But what Lansky really did, which was seminal, was he figured out how to do the money. So he created the offshore laundromat, as well as the board structure between the outfit and what formed the outfit, and then what would become and what were the primary crime families, mostly on the East Coast. The outfit was based in Chicago, and he was called chairman of the board because this was the guy who figured out how to structure it all like a business.
They accuse me of making a president. Now, I don't know Mr. Nixon any more than what I read in the newspapers. And the closest I ever got to him is seeing him on television. They claim I have 50% of Lebanon casinos, 50% of Monte Carlo. And Roosevelt sent me to visit Batista on a mission. Now, how ridiculous can we really get? This is just a global lie. Say it long enough and you'll get the people to believe it.
So you feel that you're a victim of public persecution?
I sure do.
Mr. Lansky, what does the name Jewish Mafia mean to you?
You know, I never heard that until I read it in the Israeli newspapers. Why, it's most ridiculous.
Are there many Jews in the gambling business?
Well, when you say many, you'd have to judge by percentage. I think if you took the percentage of the gambling business in the United States, took the Jews, you would find them maybe in that proportion.
And he goes on a little bit about that. But
he goes on. Yeah, Israel kicked him out, by the way. So
because he was Jewish.
He was only able to be there for two. Oh, he was. Yeah. So he was only able to be there for 2 years. He sought, he was seeking sort of to be free. That we were after him, right? And so he was seeking sort of to be there in Israel and have asylum. But he was up to whatever he was up to, and I've been unpacking that for a while. Israel doesn't normally go, get out, right? Oh my God. What? So he had been getting things going there in a way that the Israeli government was like, no, you got to go. We're revoking all of this. You can't stay here. We're gonna get out. He was such a menace everywhere he showed up because he was so brilliant. He was so brilliant, and he could just set up any kind of racket that would succeed. And with all these different tentacles, but it was just so brilliant at it. And casinos were his lifeblood. So did he have anything to do with the Monte Carlo casino? He's parsing there. He's like picking things of like, oh, they say this, but he's not talking about Cuba. He's not talking about Vegas. He's not talking about the offshore, right? Laundromat. So this was a very, very smart man.
Who helped elect Nixon, probably.
Well, yeah. That was his crew. So that was the money flooding in through there. You get into Lansky and you do end up in Chicago.
Yeah, you do.
Jill. you do end up in an epicenter there. That is, it's fascinating. I'd love to talk about some Chicago gangsters. And the only reason it falls into these categories, I just always want to be careful with this. The only reason it falls into categories based on sort of religion or heritage, any of that gets thrown in there, is because these guys came over at the turn of the last century with their families, fleeing,
Right.
you know, horror in their, whatever, whether it was Russia, whether, or, some semblance of, all those borders kept getting moved around, or Italy, right? They had to get out, and their families fled, and they came here, and it was part of that incredible immigrant tradition that makes our country so strong and so great. Because also America has had a problem with our promise of inclusion and our promise of all of that. We very much divided, it's just the path of immigrants. They would come in, have a community, everybody was sort of in their area, right? Was from the same country or same background. Maybe there was a little, they kind of mixed it in, but the only reason that organized crime looks like it's divided on these lines is because these guys came in and they were with their friends and they were with their cousins and they were like, it's just how it evolved. It's just how it evolved. There's nothing now that you could say, oh, because you're this, you're part of this thing over here.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
No, it's just the way that it happened because of how America was structured. And these young men came in and they saw what was possible here in that entrepreneurial vein. And their first acts that they became engaged with in terms of criminal acts, with bootlegging, it wasn't seen as a crime that everybody was sort of like, just, even the police were like, this is ridiculous.
Yes.
They just started doing their bootlegging. And then once they had set up that criminal enterprise, they just used it for everything. Once they figured we're not really going to be bound by the law, right? Because of that same thing that Jill was talking about with the amorality evolved within that underworld of like, we don't really have to pay attention to law enforcement. We just have to own and leverage them. These rules don't apply to us, right? We just have to not get caught. That's our problem. So that's a culture that evolved. And does it fall on these lines of heritage or whatever? Yeah, because those were their friends, and that's how they came.
That was the opportunity available,
those
maybe
were the
at the
families.
time. Yeah,
that's what it was. But just want to be careful with that because I always feel like it gets skewed into something
can be weaponized
that's
in many ways. Absolutely.
Yeah, really unfair. Yeah, really unfair.
But Jill, what
Anyway,
is
that's
the
my little
connection
mouth.
between?
That's my soapbox.
No, that's great. It's very important stuff that you're mentioning. But what is that
it's
connection
important.
between organized crime and Nixon? And is it the same wing of organized crime, if you will, that's also connected to Donald Trump? Because it looks like the same people.
Well, I have to say this is an area that I am going to have to defer to LB on.
Okay.
I'm not aware of organized crime having gotten Nixon into office. There was crime within his White House that got him reelected. And there may have been in the first election. I don't know, because they certainly didn't change their values. So this attitude of the ends justify the means may be the same thing in the original campaign. Certainly in the Trump era, if there's organized crime involved, I have, what I know as the mafia. I don't know about that happening right now with him. I do know that his attitude is the ends justify the means, and I have to be elected or now reelected at all costs. And so would they be willing to take foreign help? They said yes. Depends, you had Barr say, well, it depends on what exactly the help is. That's not true. Any foreign help is illegal, period. There can be no differentiation on what type of help it is. They can't accept it. And so that's, the willingness to violate the law to get their own ends. It's sort of like Donald Trump saying over and over and over again things like, there's no obstruction, there's no collusion, there's no there. I didn't do anything wrong. It was a perfect phone call with the president of Ukraine. Well, you say that often enough, and that's what propaganda is. Then people start to believe it. If you have William Barr saying, before the Mueller report comes out, here's the summary of it. no collusion, no obstruction. People tune out, they don't listen, and particularly the people who are followers of Donald Trump. They listen to that and they go, well, I don't have to listen to the rest of it. I don't have to listen to the reporters telling me what it says. I don't have to read it. I read the Mueller report.
It's a big thing.
That's,
yeah.
well, most people won't read it either, but
They
they
won't read
should
it.
be listening to other voices. They should be listening. We're now in a cancel culture where people don't speak out against the president because they suffer the consequences, or they don't say things that are politically less attractive because they get fired if they allow opposing views to be heard. That's something very, very dangerous. And I was very fascinated by a conversation on the Bill Maher show on this subject, and I'm now going to try to have a conversation about this cancel culture, because I remember learning in college about the marketplace of ideas, and that for democracy to thrive, you find truth by the free exchange of ideas in an open marketplace. That means that I have to listen to the views of white racists, of the Ku Klux Klan, of the Nazis, in order to be able to answer them. I have to listen to people who support Trump. The problem is when they don't deal with facts. If they just say things where you go, well, the facts are the exact opposite. When they all believe, I don't have to wear a mask, this is just going to go away. Coronavirus is going to just disappear. Well, it's not. And I can't argue with them if they won't engage on the basis of information, on the basis of truth. And during Watergate, it's important to keep in mind there were only 3 networks. There was NBC, ABC, and CBS. And all 3 had the same exact facts. You could debate the meaning of those facts, but you didn't debate the truth of the information. And now we're in this era where if I listen to Fox News, I hear one thing. If I listen to MSNBC, I hear something that is completely different. I go to the source documents. When I read a news article, I don't accept what they say. If it says a document was filed, I go and I listen to the file. I read the filing that was put into court, because I want to know what the real information is, what the facts are, because I want people who follow me on Twitter to hear my original opinion, not repeating what I've heard somewhere else.
And you always pick
Exactly.
up things. You always find things in
I
the source
so agree.
documents.
That's it. You do find the source
Yeah.
documents are everything.
Yeah.
I mean, this is and you had the opportunity to actually hear tapes. Like, you can actually hear tapes. There you go. But doesn't get any more
Exactly.
perfect than that. But I think with the cancel culture, I think the thing that's becoming collapsed, and maybe in your conversation you can help distinguish it again, right? Is that yes, we need the marketplace of ideas. Yes, we have to be able to sit and listen and value and do all
Right.
that. However, I also have the liberty to spend my money where I want to spend it.
Right.
And if I don't want to fund something, right, then I don't have to fund it. It's my money. I made it. I don't want to. I can go to this shop over here. That's also part of the free marketplace. And what I find is that there are folks jumping in the cancel culture, even terming that, right, to come in to try to collapse it, to say, I don't want to suffer any financial consequences if I'm going to be on the air spewing white nationalists and white supremacist propaganda day in and day out. I don't want these advertisers to be pulled from me. Well, those advertisers, they have an option. They don't want their brand associated with that. They don't have to they don't have to spend their money there and have their brand associated with somebody who's saying really despicable things and a lot of lies. And so it's also not disconnected from that other point you brought up about even Barr, right? And the propaganda. The reason he's also so dangerous is he's become this sort of minister of propaganda. When he wrote his thing about the Mueller report, I don't think he'd read it. It's like, first of all, I don't know that you even had time to read this thing, Mr.
Someone
Barr.
read it.
And secondly, it was disconnected from what was actually in the report in such a way that either you read it and you intentionally weaponized it to the, and are just lying about it, or you didn't read it, and you're just going to keep pushing forward with your assessment of what this has all been, because even before you took this job, because you've been sitting back and watching Fox News, and this is what Sean Hannity told you it was really all about. So either way, he's engaged in propagandizing the facts.
Yeah,
so
he's
that we don't
rewriting
pay
history
attention
as
to them.
it's happening, for sure.
Rewriting
There's no
it.
doubt. Absolutely.
Rewriting it. And so in that journey forward for you, I really look forward to it. And let's also make sure everybody always feels empowered to where, as a company, you don't have to associate with something that doesn't match your values and your brand. And as an individual, you don't have to, like, there are consequences. Sure, you've got free speech, but there's consequences. People might not like what I have to say and might never watch this again. Okay, that's the consequence.
The book is called The Watergate Girl, and it's a phenomenal read, not only because it tells you the story of Watergate through Jill Wine-Banks' incredible writing, but it also is a love story about you finding your love and your true love. And I really enjoyed that part of it, because it sort of got to get to know you in a very different way. And it's a great story for anyone who wants to get to know you better, but also any woman who was growing up at that time, and how different it would have been from earlier time in terms of trying to find love and dealing with divorce and remarrying and all those other things. So it's a great read. It doesn't get exclusively locked into the Watergate scandal, which may seem a little dorky or wonky to people. It's also a good page turner, because you get to find out how Jill falls in love. That woman that we now see on the cover there, what would she say to you today?
When I reflect back on my life, I think there's very little I would change, including, you referenced my divorce, which was the result of a very unfortunate bad marriage. And even that had a good part, which is, because it was such a bad marriage, I was very happy to work extra hard. So instead of wanting to be at home, I was happy to be at the office. And so in large part, I think my career was helped by the fact that I didn't want to be at home, as opposed to my marriage to Michael Banks, where I loved being with him and I would have wanted to be at home. So everything has sort of a purpose. And there's very little I would change. I would say to anyone now, if you want to pursue something, you can do it. And I would also say to the girl in that picture, who was known as a girl, hence the title, The Watergate Girl, because back in that era, that's what we were all called. I would say, the bad marriage isn't your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix it, and you're entitled to be happy. Many of my friends said, please don't talk about your personal life in the book. And I felt that if I was going to write a memoir, to be true and to be truthful and open was essential, that I had to tell the full story, and that I had to do it because I don't think I was alone in this. Yes, I was the only woman on the trial team, but there were many women at that time opening doors for other women, and we were all going through the same thing. And to a large extent, as I said earlier, there is still a lot of sexism and misogyny in the world, as we are seeing in the judgment of how we discuss the candidates for vice president right now. It's a not equal standard to men. And I would say that women should feel free to try to be whatever they want. Men who have only 1 out of 10 qualifications say they can do it. So should women. We don't have to have 100% of the qualifications. Just go for it.
Absolutely. Well done.
Yes,
Of
Jill.
course we want a vice president who has ambition. Can you imagine having a vice president without ambition? That would be really, really terrible.
That's how you get the experience. You go for it.
Exactly.
You go for it.
Exactly.
Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative, and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download.